Sarah, I'm so happy to have you here today. As I mentioned, as we kind of were before we started recording, that the serendipity of our teams getting together, I'm so thrilled for and so excited to talk with you today. So thank you, and thank you for taking the time, because I can only imagine how busy you are with the really important work that you're doing. So thanks again
Oh,
for being here.
I really appreciate that. No, thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you for being willing to talk about a difficult topic, which, we'll get into today, which is the work of protecting children from online child sexual abuse. And so I really appreciate you being willing to sort of dive into that and give voice to that. So right back at you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One of the things that the perfect storm for us on this show, Sarah, is when we find a woman entrepreneur like yourself, a woman founder, a woman CEO, and then there's that really significant social impact component too,
Yeah.
right? So, and look, not all social impacts are smiley, happy, shiny things, right? Some of them are
Yeah.
hard, and this is a hard one, right? To your point, right? So, I'm very happy that we're going to have this conversation. I think it's a very important conversation. So, but before any of that, you've been at this sort of work associated with human rights, with child abuse for a long time before
Yeah.
the Heat Initiative, which we'll get into. But would you mind just introducing yourself to the folks listening right now?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I have a background that started in human rights, and was very focused around issues like human trafficking and modern day slavery. And I lived in DC at the time, was working away on those issues. And then this sort of like technology angle kind of came at me hard
Yeah.
and fast. And we can dive into that a little bit more as well. But where the breadth of my experience really lies is in the intersection of technology and
Mm.
online child sexual abuse or online
Mhm.
child abuse. And actually, I just have to give like a hat tip to you because like my favorite thing became um, kind of becoming best friends with product people and really learning, understanding what product meant. We could talk about that for probably 20 hours.
Yeah.
Um,
We'll do a follow-up show.
yeah, exactly. But spend a lot of time like understanding sort of what it actually means to build technology to
Mm.
defend and protect children online. And
Mhm.
also I think the detail kind of behind the scenes of like what seems obvious to the public of like a simple change or an easy change, sometimes that's actually not the case from a
Not that
technological
easy.
standpoint. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
And so how do we make sure the technology is there in order
Mhm.
to deliver the products that we need to protect and defend children. So that was like my 10 years at an organization called Thorn.
Mm.
We built technology to defend children from sexual abuse. So
Right.
much more sort of on the technology side, working with engineers, data scientists, product folks for a long time. And then the reason that I founded the Heat Initiative, and I'm doing the work I'm doing now, is that it became clear that kind of just working that inside game of trying to bring companies along from the inside with a voluntary model was
Mm.
not going to be enough to get them
Right.
to do all the things that we needed them to do. And
Sure.
honestly, to prioritize this in an ever-changing list of priorities that is real and that you're managing at startups and at companies,
Mm.
how do we make this be like the number one priority they can't ignore, that they're investing more money in and making sure they're making those changes to um, protect kids that use their services, but also to stop the proliferation of child sexual abuse. So it is much more advocacy driven. It's about demanding change
Mhm.
and trying to create outrage around some of these policies that exist. And of course, our first focus is Apple. And we can talk a lot about that
Yeah.
because there's a whole calculus that went into why.
You chose
But
Apple first. Yeah.
yeah,
Yep. Yep.
exactly. But yeah, so now I've been learning from and am helping to run alongside some of my brilliant colleagues an advocacy organization that is about putting pressure on companies to make changes.
I appreciate what you just, first of all, thank you for the homage to product people. I really appreciate that. But I also appreciate something you
True.
just said there too about not being able to instantiate the change that you needed from within, right? And needing to go outside to create the urgency, the outrage, etc.
Yes.
One of the most important mentors I've ever had in my career, who actually passed this year, very tragically, said that as a product person, the only currency you have is the power of persuasion, because essentially that's what you're trying to do as a product person. You're persuading, right? And I can see how you're not able to persuade, like you said, people to come along with you,
Yes.
right? Internally, thus the need for you to kind of create this outside in approach, right?
Yes.
I can see you
Exactly.
nodding. So it sounds like you came to that realization, maybe in a hard way, or I don't know, but I'd love
Yeah,
to
no,
hear
it
more
was
about that.
hard.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
because I love that. I think
Mm,
that's really important, and sort of picking up on that thread. Um, both are important.
mhm.
So it's not like one or the other is better than the other.
Right.
They serve as different things. And I think that actually one of the things I feel very strongly is that a lot of times the people on the trust and safety teams and the people on the product teams are your biggest allies in
Sure.
changing the product for the better and making the changes internally. It's actually the chain of command upwards of that
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
is not
That's
listening to,
challenging. Yeah.
investing in. And so we often heard, like, from trust and safety folks, or product people kind of intermixed in that, policy people at these companies, they were saying to us, like, help us convince the leaders that
Mhm.
more investment in this space, growing these teams in these certain ways, making certain investments in different products that could make the platform safer, that actually you can help us by applying that pressure from
Right.
the outside. So I, there's a saying in the corporate campaign culture, and we're working a lot with a lot of climate activists who have kind of done this and are sort of passing their wisdom on to us. And I'm going to get it wrong, but it's something like, don't blame the people, blame like you know, um, the higher up, like the name of the company, because it's, and the leaders, because it's not like some of the individual people on these teams that we're against. It's that
Right.
we just need a different commitment to be made to actually unleash like the power of those teams in many
Sure.
ways.
Sure. In terms of the collaborate, so go back for a second to me to like the collaboration aspect, right?
Yeah.
And you mentioned, it's sometimes not a priority. Well, they're your big product folks, are your biggest alloys, or people who are focused on safety and detection are your allies. Going up the chain is sometimes more difficult. So how have you sort of taken approaches to collaborating with technology companies to kind of ensure that they're doing the effective detection and removal of sexually explicit, child images or child abuse images from their platforms?
Yeah, so I would definitely say that would be a nod to my past life in my role at Thorn.
Mm,
Thorn is an incredible organization that works alongside technology companies
mm,
to do just that. And so I know that space, but now I have really kind of left that behind. And in
mhm,
this new role, my job is to bring light to some of the decisions that some of these companies have made about
mm.
detection of child sexual abuse content, and kind of ask the question, like,
Why?
do we all
Yeah,
agree?
yeah,
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 why is this
yeah.
is this an okay place where we're landing? And
Hmm.
as a society, is this actually what we want to see? And I mean, you see this, the timeliness of this conversation is really relevant because there's been a slew of articles in the Wall Street Journal over the last
Yeah,
like 3 4
yeah.
weeks about Meta, and
Hmm.
there's been different hearings that have been called for on the Hill around this, right? This
Hmm.
idea of like, how much do companies know about harms against kids?
Yeah,
And this is actually kind of finally the manifestation of
sure.
something that's been like bubbling for a long time, which is, how are these trade-off decisions being made? And more like, are we okay with
Right.
where we're
With
living? And
those.
I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that people are signaling no, that in regards to children and their mental health and their sexual health and their all these different things that um we need to think of the online space as the fourth room in like
Mm,
people's lives now. And the same way we wouldn't let a kid go into a room with a strange adult and like close
right.
all the windows and doors and lock them in there and be like, yeah, talk for
It's all
4 hours.
good. Yeah.
Right, that
Yeah.
would never
Yeah.
happen like
Right.
IRL,
Right.
then maybe that shouldn't happen,
Online.
in
Yeah.
DMs of Facebook Messenger.
In a virtual world. Sure. Yeah. No.
Yeah,
And I think any of us that have kids or no kids or can understand the horror that you would be associated with that. Right.
yeah,
It's so
yeah,
scary. Sarah, talk to us a little bit specifically about the Apple campaign. I know that is a major initiative for you folks right now, and the work that you're specifically, kind of doing around, let's just call it Apple's failure here,
yeah,
right? Specifically iCloud, right? Which I think
yeah,
a lot of people, there's been a lot of iCloud hacks in the past, right? That have been extremely sensational, celebrity iCloud hacks and other things, right? So talk to us a little bit about the iCloud initiative and the Apple campaign that your folks are working on.
thank you. Yeah, so I think where I'd start is, in my experience, most of the major companies were kind of heavily engaged in child safety conversations for the last like 10 to 15 years, albeit not all successfully as we're
Hmm.
seeing or like making
Sure.
all the right choices, but definitely collaborating, more invested in those teams that we're talking about, trust and safety teams, and
Sure.
trying to figure out like what's the best tech to use. And Apple was pretty removed from that entire conversation. And the reason that in many ways they were removed is because, they're, and some of this is legitimate. They're saying that because they're not a social platform,
Hmm.
they are not
Yeah,
enabling
they're like a storage
sexual
platform, right?
abuse of
Yeah.
children,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And generally people have sort of accepted that.
Hmm.
But those of us who actually know what's going on are
Right.
like, well, wait a minute, we're talking about images and videos. So like, if we're looking at it from that perspective, like where are the most images and videos hosted or stored, right?
Hmm.
Why aren't we talking about iCloud? And also, iMessage too is a place that
Sure.
kids communicate. And
Sure.
if you look at the data around the sexual abuse of children, it oftentimes is someone they know. So it's not crazy that they would have their number and be grooming them over,
Sure.
iMessage versus other platforms. But it doesn't have that kind of town square where people are posting content. So it's not as obvious, I think,
Sure.
to the general
Sure.
public.
As a Facebook page or
Totally.
as a
Or an
Instagram account or right or
Yes.
X or whatever. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think that's where I understand, like, where I understand their point to be valid is that,
Sure.
correct, you need a different set of solutions for the problem that you have versus like a Twitter or an X
Sure.
or a Meta. Um, but I do think they knew that the momentum was shifting towards, are all companies detecting child sexual abuse material at scale, and who isn't? And
Right.
and I want to pause there too, just in the language, because language is a big thing in our field. Child pornography is how people mostly know it.
Right.
That is a term that we're trying to remove from our vernacular because it implies some type of like performance, or there was like agreement, or
Right.
that I think
Or
sometimes
even yeah.
just like, or people are like, oh, like a teenager and this, and we're like, no, 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 and this is actually like the evidence of the abuse of very
Right.
young children. And it's child sexual abuse material or child sexual abuse images and videos. That's like the new way to
Well, because like let's call it what it is, right? Because that's what it is. It is child sexual abuse, right? It is not
exactly. And
yeah.
also it's
Yeah.
illegal. So,
Right.
and this is the really interesting point about Apple, is the content itself is illegal, and that actually should be kind of justification and a threshold by which then companies can feel very confident about
Hmm.
detecting, reporting, and removing it, because it's actually them following through with their terms of service.
Right. Right.
So
Which
most of
everybody
the
agrees. Everybody agrees to. Every time you buy a phone, upgrade your iOS, you agree to
yeah,
those terms. But how much are they
right.
enforcing those terms? Right.
They're
Yeah.
not at all.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like a weird reversal of like terms of service. It's like, can you follow your own terms of service? So
Right.
I think that kind of that should give cover. So anyway, what's interesting is about the Apple journey, and I'm making this kind of long-winded, but I think it really is important for
Mhm.
listeners to kind of understand what's happened. Essentially, Apple did come out with a plan
Mm.
kind of out of nowhere. Those of us in the field, had been trying to sort of engage what we thought was unsuccessfully, but anyway, Apple came out with a solution.
Mhm.
Um, and the big miss was much like a lot of their other updates, they treated it like a product or engineering update as
Sure.
opposed to a policy. This is like a policy update. This is like a decision by a company to detect harmful content. And so the messaging of it and the communication of it fell back because they led with the how instead of the
Mm.
why.
The why. Yep. Yep. And everybody knows when you're doing product stuff, right? You don't start with the how, you start with the why, right? I mean, there's a
Oh, good. Is that an
yeah.
actual line
Yeah,
from product
absolutely.
people? I'm
Yes.
totally stealing that.
Well, there's a
Okay,
famous book by Simon Sinek too called Start with the Why. And
great.
that's what you're doing here, right? You're
Oh
starting
my
with why.
God.
And
Okay,
I was
perfect.
going to ask you next, Sarah, like what impact you've had since your inception. So what you just said to me sounds like a pretty tangible impact.
Well, so that happened before though. Okay, so what
Oh,
happened was,
oh, okay. All right. So my
yeah.
sequencing is off here. Okay.
No, no, no,
Keep
no,
going.
no.
Yeah.
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 Well, thank you, because maybe that
Yeah.
happened before from our work, but I
Yeah.
think it was they announced and then there was a backlash against them and
Got it.
then they paused it and
Mm.
then they silently killed the plan.
Mm.
So
Okay.
then so then just to fast forward and kind of speed it up, that was when it wasn't just me, but there were a lot of us in the field that were like, okay, we have
Mhm.
a pretty big problem if a major company can announce we're going to detect child sexual abuse content. Here's how we're going to do it. Then they sort of get put on the back foot. They're defending it poorly. Then they pause it. Then they kill it, and then nothing happens. Like
Right.
nothing bad happens. Nothing happens. And uh, to me and to a lot of others, what that signaled was that this is something they don't have to do, that
Yeah.
it's like voluntary. And for the survivors, and this is a really important point. I was actually on the phone with some of the survivors today who I have the privilege of working with.
Mm.
And they said something to me and I was like, God, that's so good. Because a hearing got delayed. And they were like, survivors don't have more days. Like our
Right.
content is already out there, and every
Right.
day that goes by, it's like recirculating. And I
Right.
was like,
It never goes away. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so for them
Yeah.
to be told we're gonna detect this stuff, and now not only are we not gonna detect it, it's just like never gonna happen,
Mm.
is pretty infuriating, understandably, and but should be for all of us, because the harms of this stuff getting traded is not just to the victims in the content, but it really is toxic content that like
Yeah.
ruins your brain, and we now have young kids also consuming it, and so it really just does not belong. Anyway, so that's why we
That's
launched our campaign.
that's a really interesting point that you just made too that I don't think I think is sometimes lost on folks, right? So it's not just, of course, there's the victims, those who are out there, right?
Yes,
But then people don't think about, yeah, but the consumption of this is just as toxic, right?
1,000%. And
Yeah.
actually that bothers survivors, like the idea that other people are using their content to groom other children or to like that,
Right.
or like that other kids
Yeah.
would be consuming it. That is one of their major sticking points,
Sure.
and is that um and that other people could just be allowed to consume it with impunity. Like there's
Right.
no repercussion from that.
Yeah.
That's how now that person's data, like, and that's really like what's core. What the
Yeah.
fundamental question is: if some guy has an image or a video of a very young child being raped, is that now his personal
Personal.
data?
Yeah. 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 Wow. So many. So yeah.
Sorry,
So
I know
yeah.
it's heavy.
No, no,
Heavy.
no, no. It's heavy stuff. And one of the things I was going to ask you about was sort of the balance between user privacy
Yeah.
and data protection
Yes.
and the need for increased online safety, right?
Yeah,
And that's a balance. And you just
totally.
talked about personal content and those types of things. Um, are there any, fast thoughts that come to mind there,
Yeah,
Sarah,
yeah.
around data, around privacy?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I call myself like a privacy advocate and a child safety advocate. They
You can
should
be
be
both. Yeah.
can be
Yeah.
synonymous.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that it's sort of been kind of purposely made to be othered of like it's either one or
Yeah.
the
And
other.
or yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you don't have to choose. Now,
Mm,
having said that, it will look different than some of the private environments that people think of now. And
mm,
so, whether it's detection and suppression of the content or whether
mm.
it's, like what happens in those environments is like something we're all still working through as a field of like how to
Right.
not let it proliferate. But the big thing that we focus on is that the word like scan gets used a lot. We're going to scan all your data.
Yeah.
We're going
Sure.
to look for the bad. That's not how these systems work, right? It's
Right.
hash matching. It's detection. So it's
Right.
known images, right, that have a fingerprint, that have a hash,
Mhm.
and it is
Right.
looking
And
for
you're
those
looking for
patterns.
those. Yeah. 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 I think
So,
people
yeah,
definitely simplify the notion of like, you're scanning through all my files without
yeah.
me even knowing, and that's
Yeah.
not okay. And yeah.
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 Or
Yeah.
that someone at the company is registering all those things. Like
Right.
they're looking through all the files and being like a ball in a pool,
Yeah.
a goat,
Right.
right? They're not looking at
Right.
anything.
Right.
They're like, it's
There's
running
a,
a
like you say, it's that
system.
digital fingerprint. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Or,
Yeah.
we try and use analogies a lot because this
Hmm.
stuff, I mean, you get it, you're in tech, like there's different levels of this conversation that we can have. But like another analogy that's I think maybe more helpful in getting everybody sort of on board with this idea of like, what are other instances where you are willing to give up a small amount of privacy for the greater good? So, like
Yeah.
walking through
Yeah.
an airport, you put your bag, nobody
You go
thinks
through
put
security.
your
Yeah.
bag through your thing, right? Nobody is like, oh, I refuse because you don't
Right.
want to get on
Because
with a bomb, right?
right. Right. All right.
Like,
I refuse because those things that are in my bag are mine and you can't see them. Right.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. But it's also only going to go off if you have something that is like questionable or whatever.
Right.
So it's just I think it's misconceptions about how the tech works that honestly have this is the sort of darker part of it is that have been like purposely weaponized by
Yeah.
some
Yeah. By some
privacy
folks.
groups and stuff
Yeah.
to make it appear as if you have to choose because I completely agree with you that privacy is extremely important and that what I always say is like I I believe we can live in a world where we can protect a journalist who's trying to get information out of Iran and we can simultaneously make sure that this 5-year-old's abuse video is not shared broadly. Like
Right.
we
Right.
can hold those two things to be true.
Right. Well, and the technology enables that, right?
Totally.
So why
Totally.
not, right? And I was gonna, also ask you about the favorite, the two-letter word that everyone's talking about now, right? Which is AI, artificial intelligence, and
Yes.
how this affects the work that you're doing. I'm sure both in a positive way, but also probably in a challenging way as
Oh,
well, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like the worst person on like new apps and stuff because everyone's like, "Oh my god, be real, it's so cool." And my brain just goes to like, "Oh my god, this is such a problem. It's
Yeah.
going to get used for all the bad things."
Right.
Um but on the AI front, I spent a lot of years working alongside or just getting to know investigators and they're often looking for a child in an image or a video. There's a whole other world of this, right? That's like trading on the dark web and things like that, where um, everything is stripped, like all the EXIF data, there's no
Right.
IP
Right.
address,
There's
right?
no
So
fingerprint. Yep. Yep.
sometimes literally they're left with like a series of photos and a child in a room, and they're like, where in the world is this, right? This was already like an immense challenge that needs technology intervention at a lot of different levels, and resulted in kids being looked for a really long time and not often found very quickly.
Mm,
And now imagine they're going to get that same series and they're going to wonder if it's a real child.
yeah.
So like
And
now in the already they have like a stack this high of cases they're
right.
investigating.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
They're going to wonder, is this even a kid I need to look for? And
Right.
so
Or is
there,
this
that is the
completely
challenge we're
generated?
going to
Yeah.
face.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I didn't even
Sorry,
think.
no,
Yeah.
again.
No, that just kind of blew.
Sorry. I always prepare people for my for
No,
my
it's but but you said something that what's actually kind of again triggered in my brain there, where you talked about the folks who are looking at these, who are doing this
yeah,
investigative work, right? And isn't it interesting how we live in a society where like people who can like thwart hackers are like almost like regarded in like a heroic sort of way, right?
yeah,
Like they're stopping the hackers from hacking us,
yeah,
with all of their brilliance and ethical hacking and all these other types of things. But why isn't that why isn't there the same regard,
yeah. Oh, it's so true. I could go on and
right?
on about this. Yeah.
Yeah.
These the law enforcement officers who specifically work on child exploitation cases and specifically work on child pornography or child sexual abuse material, these are human beings who literally end up sacrificing part of
Yeah.
their brain.
They're not to mention their
They're
emotional, psychological health, right? I mean, it's yeah. Yeah.
It's crazy, and,
Mm,
they're willing to do that for all of us
mm,
to look and find these kids because and how do we reward that, right? We
mm,
don't, to your point, we don't, and we need
right.
to, like, paying them more, but not just paying them more, we also need to, like, provide them with all the mental health resources
The
they need.
resources they need, sure. Yeah.
We need to encourage them to get the help that they need when they seek it. We need to, because they're also sometimes struggling to recruit
Yeah.
new people into that line of work, and I have never met people more dedicated to their job than those men and women that
Yeah.
I've met in that field, because
Sure.
they get into it and they get in deep, and you're looking for this kid for 3-4 years. I mean, you are like on a mission.
Sure.
So I my mindset there is, we need to be talking about them more. We need to be, making sure they have more money to do the job they need to do. And to your point, their budgets were like always so low compared to like the
Mm,
terrorist budgets and all this stuff. And the tech doesn't flow down either. So tech
right.
that a lot of those other units had, they didn't
They
have.
don't have access to. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Again, what you said about the psychological aspect of this. I have a close
Yeah.
friend. I have a close friend who worked in forensics for a long time,
Very similar.
and very similar, right? So he would say to me, "God, I love my work and I love what we're doing, but when I do speak to victims who we've actually helped with through our forensic
Yeah.
technology, but hearing their stories, he's like it's so difficult, right? And he's like, I'm literally brought to tears every time I hear a story. But obviously I'm very proud of the fact that our forensic technology helped to catch the bad guy or whatever it needed to do. But to hear that these people had to go through that in the first place, right, was just
Oh yeah.
so hard. And not having, to your point, like the resources of being able to kind of um process that, right? Very
Totally.
challenging. Yeah,
Yeah,
very
and because we're
challenging.
asking them to go face to face with, like, the
Evil. Yeah,
worst of humanity.
yeah,
Exactly,
yeah,
and then we're
yeah.
just asking them to, like, suck it up and move on
Move
and do
on.
the
Yeah.
next case.
Gosh.
Like, it's like that feels not it's a lot of the same trauma of, like, first responders, and,
Yeah, sure.
looping that all the way back to kind of the company part of it is, like, I think that's also part of the frustration with
Mm,
ignoring it is that is when you choose to ignore it, right? When companies are like, well, we're just not going to look for it.
yeah,
We're just going to ignore it. That's also in many ways an abandonment of the people who are leaning in, looking
right,
forward to it, looking
right.
at how do we actually like protect these kids, get these kids out of these situations. And so I think that's where some of the anger comes from folks that I work with in this field of like, don't deny that it is happening and that it exists, because that's part of our lived experience.
Yeah, no, truly. Wow. So the Apple campaign, extremely important, everything you're doing there. Sarah, looking ahead, what other that you can talk about now? I mean,
Yeah.
what other sort of future initiatives or strategies does the HEAT initiative have in mind as you kind of further your mission of protecting children from online exploitation?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I didn't really mention too much because I was spending a lot of time on the background, like what's
Yeah.
happened since we launched. In that we're seeing some really good traction, both
Hmm.
around the public being willing to take an action. So we had a bunch of people. We've had close to 12,000 emails be sent to Apple leadership to make this
Wow.
change, which is really exciting.
That's phenomenal. Yeah.
Yeah, we had the New York Times
Hmm.
exclusive. I think, the media is interested in understanding, like, how the most valuable company in the world has sort of gotten away with not doing
Yeah.
the
Kind
work
of
in
like
this
just
area.
ostrich syndrome, right? Put their head in the
Yes,
sand. Yeah. Yeah.
totally, totally.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, the reason I'm mentioning that is, because to be completely transparent with you, we're not looking out ahead beyond this
Sure.
particular battle, because it's gonna take, a lot to
Hmm.
change this,
Hmm.
and we learned that, and yet we also feel hopeful that Apple will, um, that Apple sees us as a partner as well, who they can bring in to help solve this problem, that there are technologists who are raising their hand to do that.
Sure.
It's really gonna be up to them of how long do they want us to have to continue these tactics before they're willing to have that conversation. But to take on the most valuable company in the world this way, in this way, you really do have to focus all your resources just on that, because otherwise we'll dilute. And it doesn't mean we'll weigh in on other companies and what they should be doing. Like I mentioned, that series with the Wall Street Journal that's focused on Meta and the decision making on, what's on their platform is critical for everyone to
Right.
consume. So there's places, but in terms of like our corporate campaign strategy, I think
Hmm.
we will stay the course. If Apple changes its policy on this, there's a broader effect than just one company doing it. And I'd be curious, like, I'm sure this probably exists in many ways, or I know it does in the tech world from a product standpoint, and how, competition and other companies change their product and everything. But if Apple does this, it will change the entire field, because they
Mm.
are seen as
People
an
follow them. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly, and they're
Yeah.
reputable, and that it's like it'll create this thing of like, well, if Apple does it, then we can do it too, right? If Apple is
Mhm.
detecting CSAM in iCloud, then we can detect CSAM, um, in our cloud, or wherever else. Like, it kind of lays the way for that. So part of the reason we chose Apple, in addition to the fact that, like, I am 100% certain the day they start detecting, they will recover children like that day.
Yeah.
Um, so that's obviously most important, but the broader effect it will have on moving of the field in the direction of, like, okay, to your point about privacy, we can hold these things together and we can sort of move forward in this way. So that's why this change will be so profound,
Mm.
when it
Mm.
happens.
Sarah, this is a very personal, right, and deeply emotional thing that you're doing. And I know you're a mom and I'm a dad, right? I'm a dad of an adult child, but she's always will be my child, even though
Yeah,
she's an adult now.
very sweet. Yeah.
Um, Talk a little bit about, you're getting up in the morning inspiration for this, because this is
Yeah.
not easy stuff. This is
No,
not
I
easy
I
stuff.
I appreciate that.
Yeah,
I definitely didn't set out in my career to be like an expert in child sexual abuse content and how it moves
sure.
on the internet.
Right.
Um,
But thankfully you are. Thank you for doing that work. But
Thank you.
but
Oh,
sure.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and I know so many other people too, like, who know it even more than I do, and like engineers who've dedicated their life to this, and
Sure.
I'm so inspired by those people. But
Of course.
I think it just goes back to what kind of got me involved in this field from the very, very beginning, which is this idea of randomness. Like, I was born in my situation and had a set of environmental factors that allowed me to live a very happy childhood and well
Mhm.
supported and take on big challenges. And and then someone else my age can be born in Phnom Penh in Cambodia and be like trafficked when they're 8 years old into a
Yeah.
brothel and have to
Right.
have sex with foreign men. And like,
Right.
why?
Right.
It's so unfair. Like, why do I get
Right.
to be me and that
Right.
girl has to be her?
Right.
And
Right.
it
Just
just doesn't, I
the
just don't.
randomness. Yeah. The randomness. Yeah.
And I would
Yeah.
want, if it was flipped, I'd want the me's to give a shit about
About
my
the
situation.
days. No, about the
You know what I
days.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah. No,
And
truly.
like,
Yeah.
so it's really, I know that sounds so simple or just like,
Hmm.
and it's interesting because it really didn't, that was in place before I became a mom.
Mm.
And even after being a mom, like, yes, some of the stories hit harder and things like that, but I actually work so hard to separate the two
Yeah.
that
I was going to
it's,
say you must have to, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I
because
don't really let
otherwise,
it blend. And the
yeah.
question was, when I had kids, would I be able to stay? And
Yeah.
I've seen it go both ways with people. And I was lucky enough that and had access to enough like mental health stuff that I was able to manage it. But
Hmm.
some other people aren't, and I don't. And there's no shame in that. If in fact, maybe they're healthier. They're
Right.
healthier than those of us who've stayed, because
Right.
it is, it's a lot to know. And we have this line of like, once you know, you can't unknow.
Right.
Um, and we don't want to expose people to like the detail of the horrors of it, but at the same
Sure.
time, we need people to then sort of stand with us and be willing to take certain actions or like raise their voice, which goes all the way back to like why conversations like this are so important and you
Right.
giving me this platform even to say this today because you're acknowledging that this happens and that's what we
Right.
need.
Well, we have to all acknowledge that there are really awful and uncomfortable things that happen, right?
Yes.
Sometimes folks ask me why I do this, and I
Yeah.
said, it has to go back to there are uncomfortable conversations that need to be had,
Yes.
and just wanted to create a place where we could have those uncomfortable conversations, no matter what the subject matter was, right?
Yeah.
So Sarah, thank you for sharing the inspiration behind the Heat Initiative. Thank you for sharing your story, all the work that you guys have done since your inception. I know it's only been a few months, but gosh, it
Yeah.
probably feels a lot longer because of the fact that you've been at this for a very long time in multiple capacities, as you've explained. So, I wish you a lot of success. I wish you a lot of success, and thank you again for just telling us your story and elaborating on the very important and specific things you elaborated on, and for like having this very important conversation with us. So thank you, Sarah.
I really
Yeah.
appreciate it. Couldn't have
Yeah.
enjoyed it more. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, we'll be watching you guys and continuing to support you in any way that we can. So thanks again.
Thank you.